All right, so the recording has started, and I want to remind people that today is my last teaching day for the class. You all will be taking all responsibilities of presentations moving forward. Okay, so can you guys see this clearly?
Yes, sir.
Yep, everything's clear. All right, so today we're looking at chapter 3, and in chapter 3, what we're really going to be looking at is we're going to be outlining the entire relational leadership model for you to consider as part of your own personal leadership development. All right, so the model is going to be presented here, and you all could comment on it and determine whether or not it's going to be something that is feasible for you to utilize moving forward in terms of your leadership growth and development. So we start out by looking at again how they try to define what leadership is, and in particular the relational leadership model focuses on the nature of the relationships that you create as a leader with people with whom you're leading. Now, if you look at your own personal experiences, you recognize that the the enjoyment with working with other people is very dependent upon the nature of the relationship you've developed with the individuals. So if you have a very cursory or distant relationship with the individual that you're working with for this chapter, then the work is not necessarily, or the experience is not necessarily going to be something that you might enjoy. In fact, it might become tedious if the relationship is one that is strained. The better the relationship, the better the work is between the individuals, and therefore it makes it a lot easier for us to work with each other. So this is why the relational leadership model is hinged upon the entire concept that the nature of the relationship is going to be very important, and that you as a leader you have to pay attention to the the relationships you develop, because it determines or sets up the context in which leadership takes place or is practiced. We don't do it in a vacuum. It's something that um, is required for us to work together with. So remember again the definition of the leadership, of what leadership is, as a relational and ethical process of people together working to attempt to accomplish positive change. And notice, of course, we're looking at a number of things. We're looking at it being ethical, we're looking at the relationship, and we're looking at positive change as opposed to other alternative types of change that can take place. All right, so it involves 5 primary components. It looks at the purpose for us getting together, that the model hinges upon being inclusive. The model also requires that we empower the individuals with whom we engage with, that our behavior is ethical in nature, and that the entire process is process oriented, meaning that it's something we can do over and over again and get the same results or get improved results. So it's not something that is a hit or miss. It's something that we will be utilizing time and time again to be able to generate good relationships. So what this is basically is a system of trying to develop your leadership potential in a manner in which you recognize the important elements, and you're able to duplicate this in numerous circumstances when you have to work in groups and work as a leader, or even work just as a follower in groups and stuff and such. All right, so this is a representation of the model in terms of, you realize the purpose is at the center, and it kind of grounds everything together. The inclusive and empowering elements and the ethical elements are intertwined with each other, so they all intersect with each other, and they're all surrounded by the fact that it's a process that we're utilizing. So this is a visualization of the process that the text actually creates for us. All right, so moving forward, um, the model is one that is aspirational in nature. It is a model that speaks to what we would like leadership to look like in the future. It is not something that currently exists around us. Um, but what we're hoping is something that we can aspire towards to help develop better leadership and better group activities, better organizational behaviors moving forward. So the purpose of any organization kind of defines or drives how that organization works. So the purpose is going to be an important element that we're going to be looking at. In fact, one of your chapters is going to focus a lot of attention on vision and mission. And you all will be looking at that in a little more detail than we're looking at here. So that purpose is going to be one of the important things. And of course, we spoke about being inclusive, empowering, and ethical in your behavior, and that we want to be able to do this over and over again. So it's going to be process oriented. Now, it's important that we understand that good organizational culture is vision driven and not position driven. Now, what do we mean by that? We mean that the organization is driven by a shared vision of what our future ought to be. It is not driven by the presence of an individual in a position of leadership. Because what happens to an organization when that leader is replaced or moves on, then what ends up happening is that the organization loses focus because the vision was really driven by the individual that was sitting in that office. And you can see that happening with a fair number of organizations in the past, where when the person who led the organization passed away, the organization, in some instances, shut down or failed to operate, or had to go through major transitioning or major change to be able to move from that position-driven orientation into a more vision-driven orientation. This is especially true of some of the past larger type of organizations that we had, like Ford and GM and stuff like that. So the absence of one of the individuals from that organization really led to some problems with them moving forward. All right. So this is one of the reasons why, for continuity purposes, organizations are vision driven, not position driven, because it is going to be problematic when people move on, because we don't live forever. Remember that whole thing. Um, if when somebody moves on, that the vision is something that wasn't shared or wasn't agreed to because they weren't there at the beginning of the process. So this is why organizations that are looking at existing for a long period of time really are vision driven, not position driven. That's something that we're going to be looking at as well. All right, so you all remember that knowing, being, doing model that we talked about, knowing yourself, um, being aware of how others view you, and then acting upon those things. That process is one that we want to revisit again, because again, we are saying that in order for you to really be able to lead, you need to know yourself, know how other people perceive you, and be able to act upon it. Now, when we talk about knowing yourself, what we're really talking about is not just technical ability, but also you have to pay attention to what are those very important principles that guide your life. So here now we're starting to talk about your belief structure, your um, your principles, your ethical values, your moral values. Those things are something that you need to be acutely aware of for you to be able to move forward, because they are going to influence your behaviors and your actions with other people, and they will define the nature of the relationship that you develop with them. That makes sense, guys? Yes? Maybe? No?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, importantly, the process that we're talking about here is a circular process, because it's not a one and done deal. You don't go through the process of self-assessment, um, and influencing your activities and your practice and stop once. You have to continually reassess who you are on a continuous flow, because as you learn more about yourself, you make adjustments, you make changes, and therefore you have to relook at how those adjustments have affected your relationship moving forward. So Palmer, for example, looks at this in the context of head, heart, and practice. So your head is really about your knowledge and your information. Your heart is about your emotional and empathic connections to people in organizations. And your practice really describes the way in which you go about dealing with them. He made the comparison between this particular knowing, being, doing, head, heart, and practice with the practice of teaching. So all of us here have been at one point in time students in a classroom. So that one of the things we have as a commonality here is that we have all been taught. We've all met and worked with teachers over time frames in different environments. And that means we can probably relate to the experience of working with teachers in the past who really cared about you. Similarly, we probably have the experience of working with teachers who really didn't care much. That makes sense? And unfortunately, one of the things that we're able to do is realize that when we work with people who don't have that empathic feeling towards you, don't have some sort of emotional connection to you, we don't necessarily have very good experiences with them. Any of you all have examples of working with people who are really good? You connected with them. I hope all of you all have had really good teaching experiences and learning experiences in the past with teachers. Do you all have good examples or bad examples, or you have examples of both? Rampol.
Both, sir.
Both, Kalisha? All right. So tell me, give me an example of where you've met a poor example of that, Kalisha. Hey, it's Modest. Nyla. Hi, Miss Modest. Welcome. How come I put? Oh, no, it's not that one. Welcome, Miss Modest. All right. So we were talking. Good afternoon. Nyla, as you just reached, can you tell me about a teacher that you've worked with before that you really had a bad time with or difficult time with?
I don't think I had any.
Oh, good for you. Anybody here had a period where you worked with a teacher that was difficult to work with and was problematic generally in the classroom?
Not
Nobody?
really, sir.
All right, great. So it means that you had really good experiences. What was, let's then speak from the positive side then. What was the best experience that you had? So I'd like other people to contribute. How about Aaron? Able to contribute, Aaron? Mr. Manik? All right, Josiah, what about you?
So I would like to add
Yes, Fina.
um, a situation whereby a topic whereby it wasn't too clear on, um, and yes, the teacher may have asked you to share information, but you wasn't too knowledgeable on it. Rather than the teacher made you feel uncomfortable or embarrassed among the classmates, the teacher literally highlighted the information and then provided another opportunity for me so that
Mhm.
I could have actually provide an example to answer the question.
All
So
right.
that is by the leadership of the tutor, the educator, that allow me not to feel, less than, but
Right. So they didn't
use knowledge and wisdom how
ridicule.
to
Right.
communicate fluently or comfortably among my peers.
Good. And that was a good type of behavior that you're referring to. Right,
Yeah,
Ferdinand?
can I also add?
Yes, of course you can.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Ferdinand. Yes,
So,
Kalisha, go ahead.
for my first semester, I came across a lecturer. He was really nice. He taught well, but there was certain topics that I was having problems with, and I reached out to him via WhatsApp, and
Uh-huh.
he used to take the extra time and help me with the questions and stuff. And I did really well in his course, and um, that showed me that he, although I didn't understand certain things, he didn't want and go into other topics, and he ensured that he helped me understand, and that turned out really good on my part.
Good. Excellent. So you all have been having good experiences. Um, I suspect that a lot of this is in the college, and that's very good in the sense that you've had excellent experiences with teachers who care, and that's the relationship that we're talking about. That the person's intellect, their head, their technical knowledge, their emotive connection with you, meaning caring about people, influences their practice. And this is what we're talking about with the knowing, being, doing. That yes, we know we have our technical information, but we also have to be able to connect with each other to become better leaders. So if you compare the teacher as the leader in that particular circumstance, the leader is kind of guiding you through the process of how to practice being a good leader, because you're not, as Ferdinand says, you're not ridiculing people because they don't know something or they don't understand something. Though a lot of teachers in the past, my past experience, I've had teachers ridicule you for or make you feel really stupid if you don't know something. That used to be a technique that was utilized by a lot of teachers, especially in secondary school, where it was this whole thing about you being um, embarrassed and made to feel less of an individual, and it would discourage people from actually trying to learn the work, because if you're in an environment where you are made to feel less than good about yourself, then you're going to want to avoid those particular relationships or avoid those particular circumstances as much as possible, which is one of the reasons why um, if you ever come across in your children, for example, if you ever come across when you have children, them talking to you about the nature and behavior of a difficult teacher, pay attention to the quality of the relationship that they have, because it may mean, and a lot of teachers make these statements, they get up in class and they make statements like, I don't get paid for this, I don't really care about what happened to you. When they make statements like that, it starts to speak to where they are in terms of how they feel about what they're doing. And far too often, we have in the secondary school system too many teachers who are there simply because it's just a paycheck, and that is dangerous in terms of the nature of how we end up developing the ideas of what leaders are supposed to be from the teachers that we experienced in the past. So something for us to pay attention to. I'm happy that the majority of you seem to have had good, positive experiences. That's excellent. I know I've had a combination of good and bad lecturers over time, and I have also had the experience of having to discipline teachers in my role in the college in relation to how they went about doing certain things with students in the past. That's not an easy thing to treat with either. And that then speaks to what we're talking about here. When you are able to indicate that you are knowledgeable, then people are willing to work with you because they will say, you know, this person knows their work, they understand what they're doing, they're competent in their knowledge, which is the knowing aspect. There are 4 levels or 4 different skills that we need to be able to develop as teachers or as leaders. Interpersonal skills, conceptualization skills, the technical abilities that go with the position that you're working in, and your tactical skills. Now, we still have a circumstance in some instances where leaders and teachers fall into the category of being highly skilled, meaning they have very good technical skills, but they lack a couple of the other skills. So they may lack tactical skills of negotiations and developing good human relations, or they may lack effective communication, or they may have a combination of lacking creative thinking and that type of stuff. Those things are looked upon as being extremely important for you to be able to lead effectively. The model is saying that you have to develop all these skills. So if you can assess yourself and determine, listen, sometimes people, I have problems with negotiating with people and dealing with conflict. That is something that I have to work on. So those are aspects of your leadership skills that you need to be looking at, or your interpersonal skills need some work as well. So those are the kind of things that you want to look at. Sometimes your technical skills are the easiest ones to actually get help with, because technical skills are, you know, pointed at becoming an expert in some sort of subject matter or some area of activities. That is probably the easiest one to acquire. But in terms of being able to think about creative ways to teach a class or to bring across an idea, those kind of things take time. And more importantly, they also take experience. So it's not something that we expect that you will, you know, fall out of bed and understand. It takes time for you to develop and grow. And that's the whole process of it, which is why the knowing, being, doing process is a circular process, because as you learn more, you develop more skills and you develop from making errors. And that's something that you have to pay attention to, that you will learn more about who you are. And as you learn more, it affects your understanding of people around you, and then it's going to affect your practice of how you interact with individuals. And as you learn more, you have to go back and revisit the understanding yourself with moving forward, and learning more, probably bringing different elements of the skills that you're looking at to the fore. In learning about yourself, you also want to look at, as we talked about, the kind of value structure that you have, the values that you carry and that you exhibit, because despite what we may think, what the principles that we hold are very plainly visible on an individual, though we may try to hide them. What we truly believe about people and things around us and society become plainly visible to us from the outside, because we can see it through your behavior, your actions, and how you do things. And that's something that a lot of people, you know, kind of pretend a little bit, that they try to what's the word I want to use? They try to be a little deceptive about truly what they feel about an individual. That kind of stuff is very superficial in nature, but it eventually shows itself, especially if you're around the individual for a long enough period. All right, so here we've been talking about the doing action, and the every time we do something, we learn more about it, that type of stuff. So it's this circular process that we keep on going, and we keep on doing, we keep on learning. So we understand this particular thing. We have to also be we have to be able to accept that we will make mistakes, and we cannot wait on perfect situations to be able to act in terms of the doing element. I have worked with leaders in the past who do nothing because they don't have everything they think they need to be able to perform the task. And that starts being problematic, because it means it holds an organization down and say, okay, we can't do this because we don't have this. well, we don't have this, but let's see if we can do something in the meantime and find us a fix for the solution. As opposed to that, they said, no, 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 we're not doing anything until we get this. And then that means you have this fixation on perfection, but you also set up the situation where you're not allowing any sort of errors. And when you don't allow for errors, you've stunted learning. Because how best do we learn by doing things and making mistakes? For example, how many of you all cook? That might be a difficult question. Only you? All right, everyone. Very good. Thank you for responding. So all right, Chanel. Okay, so does it mean that every time when you started cooking, you were making perfect dishes? No, it
No,
means that you
sir.
have, right, no, it takes time, and if you fix it, I mean, people might get a little vexed with you because the food it tastes good, or you might burn something along those lines. But at the same time, it means that you don't want to create, as a leader, a situation where not taking chances is not part of the process of learning, because then if that's the case, that you as the leader are doing that, then what ends up happening is that nobody wants to take a chance around you because they know that you don't tolerate mistakes as a leader. And that then means that your organization is going to run in that type of thinking process. If we can't make mistakes, then we can't do this and can't do that. It's a whole connective type of thing there, because we're not allowing learning. And we're not saying that learning in the job or learning in an organization is an important methodology or process that you utilize. So that how can you promote learning as a leader? Well, three ways. Through your own actions of actively seeking learning and actively seeking information, by helping others in your organization to learn, and by creating an environment in which the culture of the organization promotes and encourages learning in it. Now, if you've worked in organizations like that, then you find that when we learn together and we learn as a group, we can actually bring out more options available for us to deal with issues and problems. I know, for example, in Costard, when you guys go on vacation, we go back into class and we then try to help each other learn new techniques of how to go about dealing with building classes online, teaching students, developing technology or learning new technology as it becomes available, and helping each other to help develop our learning potential and that type of stuff. But if you've been in organizations where learning is not a priority, that the leader does not see themselves as being somebody who needs to learn anything, then it doesn't encourage the rest of us to do so. And I've actually been working in organizations, and COSTAT in particular, even where the president of the college will come and sit in a class next to you. That's an excellent scenario where you're sitting next to the leader of the organization in a class like a student, learning something that maybe they've done before, but they're willing to sit in a class with everybody else and go through the same process of learning over and over again. It opens a set of different types of relationships that you work together with. I don't know if you've ever done that with somebody in a leadership position. It could be in your home, it could be in a school, it could be in an organization. Have any of you all ever experienced doing that with somebody who's in leadership? Both of you all together learning in a classroom environment? Show of hands, anybody? Nobody. Okay, so it's actually quite it really develops a sense of connectivity with your leader when you work together, working in programs with each other. It is a really important thing that you want to pay attention to. All right, so we talked about this before, so we're going to get into it a little more details here. The relational leadership process model is purposeful, meaning that it's based upon an organizational having specific goals and objectives that they're going to work together to try and get accomplished. Now, in order to do that, it means we have to engage with other people, find commonality, and work together towards enhancing or achieving those goals. Now, any of you all here participate in any kind of community-based activities? This is not good. Nobody here is in some kind of church group or social group. It could be an online, right? So what groups are those, guys? Miss Rampol, and I think Alicia, you had your Kalisha, you had your hand just opened up. What type of organizations are they?
The church community groups.
Church, all right, good. And Kalisha?
Church as well, sir.
All right. So what does your church group do? What is their objective? You have to think about it. Either one of you, Rampolo or Allah, or anybody else. What is the purpose of your group? Miss Allah?
So we usually have Bible study, prayer meeting. They also get together and they try to help like people in the community financially and in that kind of aspect.
Okay, so but are you? Is it that the group is primarily for developing an understanding of your faith and the Bible, or is it one in which it focuses on outreach? Do you have like a constitution and that type of stuff?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever read the Constitution?
No.
But you should, because the Constitution would indicate what the purpose and function of your group is going to be or should be. I understand that maybe you're a junior member, right? Is that the case? You've only recently started to take an active role in it?
No, sir.
Oh, how long have you been active in it?
About 3 to 4 years.
All right, good. So, but that means you came in as a junior member, right? Who leads the group? Which, you don't have to tell me the person's name. Not person's name, but
I only know his first name.
Is it an
his
elder
name is
from the
Daniel.
church?
Yes,
No.
sir.
Is
Daniel
an elder
Mahatu.
Right, but it's an elder from the church, right?
Yeah.
Right. How did he arrive in that position of leadership? Was he nominated? Was he elected? Did he just is it because of some executive position he has within the group?
So, well, to be honest, this is how I know it. He grew up in church and he was always part of it, and so he took over after the other pastor. So it's like that.
So it's like a junior pastor then. So it's a bridging program that is utilized to develop people who have an objective to become a pastor in the future. So it's like their own leadership program that they have to develop new pastors, correct? Something along those lines?
Yes, sir.
Does it allow for females to begin evangelizing?
Yes, sir.
Good. All right. So do you see yourself in the future getting involved with things like that?
Maybe.
Maybe. All right. Good. And does it mean that the goals and objectives of the organization are determined by him, or is it determined by the church doctrine?
It's determined by him.
All right. So that means your organization is what driven? It's driven by the person there, not by the vision of the organization. So that's can be because when he moves off, what happens to the organization? it changes, doesn't it, based upon who's sitting there in the office. So maybe there's some change that you can suggest to the senior management of it, that they should really look at formalizing the group and focusing its attention on the needs of the participants or the membership, as well as outreach for the thing. So, you have to have a serious talk with them in relation to doing that. But again, you're relatively junior. You're only there about 4 years now, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so they're gonna say, what does upstart think she want to do? So you have a very interesting opportunity to grow in leadership within your church by approaching the existing leadership and seeing where you can put some of these things that you're learning now into practice. Interesting. Kalisha, you have a great opportunity in front of you. Are you willing to rise to the challenge? Don't answer that, okay? You don't have to answer that. All right, but it is an interesting opportunity for you to make that youth group or that prayer group or whatever the nature of it have more purpose in the society and in the organization itself, overall organization. It's something that you want to look at. But again, how you go about doing it, let's wait a little bit and find out how you go about that. How do we create purpose in organization? Well, one of the ways is to create it through what we call socialized vision, meaning that we don't depend only upon the personalized vision of the individual who sits in a seat of power, because that's often weak and it is limited to the existence of the individual in the organization. And if they leave or move on from that position, then it's likely that that vision dies with them. A socialized vision, on the other hand, is a vision that is developed by everybody within the organization or who have a direct input into it. And that type of so this is what the personalized vision is. It's about somebody who's in a position of authority, who creates a vision and then hands it to everybody else. Whereas a socialized vision is one that is developed by the people within the organization who collectively get together and decide, we would like to do these things. We would like to try and help people by doing X, Y, Z. Yes, we want to do, develop our faith and develop our understanding of the Bible and the text and and move our faith forward. But we also want to help to bring other people into the fold, which is called outreach. And not only just people within the church, but reach out and help our society and the communities that we live in. So those are the kind of socialized visions that you need to work with within the organization and get people to buy in. Because when they buy in, then everybody who shares your vision will be willing to put in the work necessary to achieve it. As opposed to if somebody comes and tell you, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. That's a personalized vision. If we have a shared vision, or so what the text refers to as socialized vision, it means it was developed by the input of everybody coming into it. Now, so one of the things with socialized vision, however, is that when an organization exists for a long period of time, a socialized vision becomes based upon the historical vision of people in the past setting up that vision. Now, that might have been the case with your organization, Kalisha, that in the past, the vision of that particular group had been set up, but it is not being managed as you've changed over membership over time. So it means it appears as if you're seeing personalized vision coming into play, where somebody who now comes to the fore and takes charge of that particular activity is now leading that particular charge. But again, when you have socialized vision that has a length of time, it has historical roots, then ever so often you have to go through the process of vision sharing. I don't know if you all ever went to an exercise where there's been that kind of vision sharing, where you examine the stated or documented vision and mission statements of an organization and see whether or not it is still relevant to the organization in its current stage. Now, generally, well designed vision and mission statements stand the test of time because the vision is generally going to be a future oriented place that we want to achieve or something that we want to achieve. And the mission that goes with it is the journey we must take to get to it. So generally, visions um, visions have longevity, and therefore they can last and be transitioned from one group of individuals to another. But if you don't go through the process of evaluating your current vision given the current circumstances, then you're less likely to have people when they join an organization to recognize what they're actually doing. So when you join a committee or you join a any kind of organization, you ought to find out when upon entry into that organization, what are the goals and objectives of that organization? What are we here to do? We're not just meeting because it's a good time, which are unfortunately a lot of of community-based activities tend to end up boiling down to. They're just getting together to have a good time. I don't know if you've ever felt that in some of the activities you get into in your church groups or in your social groups. Ever got that impression sometimes? Oops, we just lost somebody. Kalisha, Fadina, you all have been the more vocal individuals in class. Anybody else wants to contribute if you've ever participated in that kind of community activities? No? Right. Okay. So understand therefore that a socialized vision, yes, Ferdinand.
So the workplace also offers those kind of environment that what regarding the vision and the mission, so that the
Correct.
staff could towards a common goal and that the environment could be a rewarding environment for the services that you offer on a daily basis.
Correct. That's actually quite true. And that socialized vision or that shared vision is something that oftentimes you find you have to go through a little period, especially when you're bringing in new staff, that you have to socialize them in that particular vision as well, or else there'll be a lack of continuity and a disconnect when you come into the organization. Well, why are we doing what we're doing? Well, this is why, because we have this vision of where we want to be in the future. And this is what we do in order to achieve that. That's our mission statements in terms of doing that. So are you all familiar with vision and mission statements of COSTAC, for example? Are you familiar with them? If you look at most of your course outlines, you'll see the vision and mission statement on it. Just letting you know. I would ask you all, there is a group, let me see which group that is. Vision and strategic direction. Ms. Reed and Mr. Manik, Aaron, you all are going to be looking at the specifics of vision and strategic direction. I will ask you to include an analysis of COSTAT's vision and mission statement in context of that presentation. That's on the 18th. And it kind of overlaps into complex organizations. That's Ferdina and Gera. When you're coming across those concepts of vision and mission statements, make sure you include COSTATs and maybe even the organization you currently work for, or the churches that you belong to, or any sort of organization that you belong to. Utilize the examples of vision and mission statements within the realm of your own experiences and see whether or not those visions and mission statements are good and powerful and strong and can actually survive the test of time. All right. Okay. So An effective leader just doesn't impose their vision on others. They recruit others to a shared vision, especially in our digital age when power tends to coalesce around an idea, not a position. Leadership is a partnership, not a sinecure, right? Now, the idea here is that you have to share that vision, or else if you're the only person with that vision of the future, then you're not going to be able to achieve it, at least not with the assistance of other people. And the reality about it is that you can't achieve anything without the cooperation of others. That makes sense? This is why relational leadership focuses so much on it being purpose driven. Because when you have a group of people who are, are see that vision as something good and useful for the future, there's power in that. If you can motivate people, and this is something that we have to pay attention to, because in the past there have been people who had visions that weren't necessarily good things. That's why, again, one of the guidelines with the type of vision that we have for our organization is that we want positive change. We're not focusing, or we don't want to focus on negative things. All right, like, get rich quick or die trying, that kind of nonsense. Those visions of a short-term future are things that you don't want, that this model doesn't want to encourage. What we want to encourage is those things that are better for our community, that are ethical in nature, that respond to the being socially responsible to all the environments and communities that we engage in, including our own. All right, so those are the things that we want to talk about in terms of the leadership purpose and why it's important for it to be grounded in a vision. Because when it's grounded in a vision, it means that we are actually looking towards doing something, but just not anything. It's that it is working towards something positive. We need to pull together and focus our attention on something that is positive. Now, if we really think about it, positive is relative, because what is positive for you may not be positive for somebody else. Can you think of something that might be positive for you but negative for somebody else? And that's within a very selfish realm of your own of your own experiences. Huh? So remember, the model is telling us support positive change that is change that improves the human condition and does not intentionally harm others. This is a very important element of the change that we're talking about. It's positive change that improves overall human conditions and does not intentionally harm other people. And a lot of organizations have problems with that, because remember, an organization, especially private organization, in order for its continuity, it must be profitable. And in being profitable, it can then give back to society. But if in its profitability, it is harming the society or harming the environment, then is it truly positive change? Or is it that we're just looking at something that's negative in nature? Let's take the example of Amazon. One of Amazon's objectives is to, make it easier for us to be able to purchase goods and services and have it shipped around the world. But in doing so, in meeting that objective, and of course being successful at it, because Amazon is probably the world's largest retail outlet now, online store. Is it hurting people? And if we look at the arms of operations, we can see that there are significant drawbacks to the actions of Amazon and its treatment of its employees in particular. It's also contributing to the development of a lot of waste in terms of packaging material. That is something, those are things that people are looking at. Is the activities contributing enough to make its negative impact compensated for? That's something that we have to think about as well. So in a lot of instances, some of the objectives that we have may not be totally positive, but partially positive. And what we want to make sure is that the amount of positiveness is able to undo the negative or at least compensate for it. That's just something that we want to pay attention to. All right. So generally, when we're talking about this, we're talking about working towards positive change. Positive change that is socially responsible and change that improves all of our conditions, not just one group of individuals, which is something that sometimes creates a bit of a problem when organizations, especially private organizations, start to get involved with activities. Um, because at the end of the day, they are all going to be profit oriented, especially in the democratic societies. It's always going to be like that, where you have free markets operating. You're going to find that profits are going to govern and dictate a lot of the actions that take place in your society. But the problem is whether or not, from your own perspective, whether or not it's actually ethical in nature. Is it helping and improving things, or is it that we're just making these changes because we have to make a change, and this change will benefit the company, but not necessarily the society? All right. And there's a lot of things that people discuss in relation to that in terms can you think of any changes that have been made by organizations that have been good for them but bad for us generally as a society? Anybody? I'm pretty certain that there are some that you might be able to find. What has changed in the last couple of years, last decade or so, that you see as being good from an individualistic point of view, but bad from a collective point of view? Anybody could think about something along those lines? All right. Now, you are going to be tackling a chapter. In fact, there's a group down at the end here. Jada, Kalisa, and Paulina, you are all going to be looking at chapter 15 from the draft, which closes our presentations for the semester in leading change. And you're going to examine change during that period. I would suggest that you look at from a broad scale. There are lots of things you have to look at there, but look at some changes that may have taken place that from face value, it looks good, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily something that is good for the world or the environment, things like that. Now, how does change take place? So the first thing that they speak about with change is that something causes us to change. Generally, they refer to it as unfreezing. That's the analogy that they use. Most times organizations tend to be kind of frozen into shape or methodologies of how they do things. Something has to happen that triggers the need for change to take place. They refer to it as a trigger event. That causative factor, let's take for example the pandemic, that triggered a massive change in the organization of COSTAT and a lot of tertiary education schools and the education system to shift out of a dependency on face-to-face classes and triggered the development of online classes. Now, was that a good thing or a bad thing? So based upon who you speak to, a lot of people look at it as being overall negative. Why they see it as negative? Because they look at the lack of physical socialization as being a loss that is experienced by students and teachers in the system. However, what has been happening is that the movement back into face-to-face environments has been hampered by the unwillingness of people to want to move back into a face-to-face situation. Would you agree with that assessment? Anybody? Now that we could move back into face-to-face classes, why is it that the vast majority of face-to-face classes are not subscribed to by students? Nobody wants to answer. This is a safe space, you're free to be. Go ahead, Danielle. I need to say that again. It wasn't very clear.
Everyone get comfortable being at home for the past 2 years, so they wouldn't really want to go back out into the environment.
True.
So
Okay.
it's less convenient.
It's what? Sorry?
It's less convenient.
It's more convenient, you mean?
No, less. The physical classes, less convenient.
Oh, okay. That's why you don't go to them. Yeah. It's also costly, isn't it?
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, it costs more to get to class, and then interestingly for the organization, it also costs more for us to run a physical class than it does for us to maintain an online platform. From a cost factor, that's an element. Also, the outreach, for example, many of you in this class and in some of my other classes are from all over Trinidad and Tobago, and it allows for everybody to be in the same class regardless of your physical location in Trinidad. Whereas if this class was being taught at City Campus, for example, some of you from South or from Tobago couldn't attend, or at least it'll be very difficult to attend those classes. That makes sense? Yeah?
So I know some people for my classes who would have take like 2 to 3 week trips during the semester. How the classes online?
Yeah. What program are you in?
Entrepreneurship and management.
All right. So when you say take trips, I mean they can leave the country and go somewhere else, but still attend classes.
Leave the country.
Right. I've actually had students who we knew from the beginning they weren't in Trinidad. They were students of the college, but they were in Guyana, Grenada. I had one who was in the Cayman Islands. I had even at one point in time I had students in Japan who would come into class at for her it was the middle of the night when it was daytime here, because of the nature of how the environment is set up. You understand? So Josiah, yes, those are things that make it difficult to turn back the clock and go back to face-to-face classes. Do we want to? Not necessarily, but there are some give and take. There's some give and take that we might want to work at. Now, the theory about change or change theory speaks to that trigger event that causes us to make changes. But what we speak about, therefore, is an unfreezing. Is it that once we make the change, we then stop and refreeze the organization? No, the change process tells us that what we ought to do is, instead of refreeze ourselves into this new paradigm that we find ourselves working in, we actually need to leave the condition very malleable, or what they refer to as a kind of slushy type of activity. Why? Because when other stimulus comes up, we can also adjust based upon the fact that we are already accustomed to be making change. Now, the problem of change is that change has resistance. And unfortunately, when there's a lot of resistance, it means that initially, for example, we had a lot of resistance when we were making the switch over. A lot of students felt, I can't do online classes, I don't like it, and yada, yada, yada. Some lecturers had serious problems. Even some administrators said, well, how can we, one of the problems that administrators have with us teaching from our own homes and stuff like that is, well, how do we say that they're doing work? Because they're not seeing us sitting at a desk and doing work, that kind of thing. And one of the things that we were able to point to was that seat time doesn't equate with productivity. Because you're sitting in an office doesn't mean you're actually being productive. Myself, I'm more productive when I work from home. I get more done. I get more done because I'm working on my own time frame. I'm not time bound. I know if I have meetings, I can jump into meetings online and not have to worry about driving down the road, fighting up with traffic, finding some place to park, then getting worried about what's happening in that environment. There is my car safe, that kind of stuff, and then trying to focus on being in a meeting, contributing to that, then thinking about, okay, I had to get home, so now I have to rush back, and all of those things make it less difficult for me to do work. In fact, what happens now is I actually have to remind myself not to work. I end up spending too much time working. So that becomes problematic. I have to say, okay, I have to take some time off. I have to sit down. I have to walk away from my PC. I have to walk and go and do something else rather than just only focus on work. That is something that I have had to struggle with. And interestingly enough, the movement back into the face-to-face classes is something that I don't see as being feasible really, because now we could reach out to more students from different areas as well. So again, the change theory, and there's a chapter, as I said, on change and leading change. Because there's so much resistance, there is usually going to be some arguments for and against. But when the change is made, you have to get the change to stick. So there are strategies for dealing with that moving forward. So when we talk about this change process, we're actually looking at developing an organizational structure that does not change and then become rigidly fixed into that state of refreezing itself or cementing itself into a new format. But we want to be in a state in which we remain flexible, so that when the further change is necessary, that change will take place. The rigidity of the organization is something that we have to pay attention to, especially if we are trying to transition to something that is positive. Again, we have to look at positive to who? Positive for the organization, positive for the students, positive for the faculty, positive for the staff. It depends. Okay, so those are the circumstances we want to pay attention to. The fact of the matter is that whenever change comes, it actually takes a lot of time. You spend a lot of time trying to get change accomplished in an organization, and leadership in periods of change are critical, because as a leader, you have to be somebody who's at the forefront and champion of that change. Because if you aren't the champion of the change, you become an obstacle to the change. And I've seen that happen where some people who were in leadership positions in organization became the biggest sticklers for not changing. And what eventually starts to happen is those people either get mowed over because the change is inevitable, and it will happen regardless if you want it or not. Now, for those of you who might, for example, work in the public sector, there are changes that are coming to the public sector that if you don't make those changes, you are actually going to end up getting mowed over by the systems that come into place there. And that's something that a lot of the public sector tries to protect against, in the sense that change can't be for change's sake. Change has to be made for positive development in our societies. Now, one of the changes that's been coming along is that a lot of the government services have been moving into online type environments. Yes? Now, with that comes a whole host of other risk factors. But a lot of people who work in or are hired by the government to run offices do not like that environment, because it means that their job securities might be affected by it. Because no longer do we need somebody sitting in an office to have to deal with transactions in a public sector office. It means that you can have people working from call centers or working from home, for that matter, to do the outreach necessary for the jobs. And one person can treat with a lot more people than the type of individuals that we see sometimes. You go into an office and you see 20 people sitting down and only one person at the desk treated with the public. It's kind of ridiculous when you see those kind of things happening. So there are a whole host of changes that are likely to come in the service that are going to be negative for some people, but positive possibly for the wider environment, the population. And that's something that we have to look at when you're looking at changes, especially since it's not only time consuming, it's costly to go through the processes of changes as well. All right. Again, when you're joining a group that is in the midst of change, it is important to connect with those new individuals coming into the organization, connect them with the vision of where we're going. And this is why we're transitioning from this place to the other place, because you can't expect somebody to accept the change that you're trying to take place if they don't understand why that change is being made. And that's a critical thing that you want to be able to do as well. All right, so we're going on to the area, another area that leadership, we spoke about this, leadership has to be inclusive in nature. So when we talk about being inclusive, we talk about inclusive and valuing everybody in a diverse community. So the diversity issues that we speak about is they have differences in approaches and styles and aspects of individuality, such as their gender, sexual orientation, or culture. And that adds, because that variety adds more perspective to a group. Now, the problem here is that in trying to be inclusive, you are also going to begin to challenge people's points of view about concepts that they think are right and wrong. And that is a challenge, especially if we look at it from our current perspectives. We can see that it is something that we have to pay a lot of attention to, because I mean, now we have this whole gender spectrum issue that we have to deal with. So it's not just the two genders, we're dealing with a whole spectrum of genders. Sexual orientation is something else that is going to be also sits on a spectrum. Then you have people coming from different cultures, because as we become more multicultural, we have to open ourselves up to alternative cultures coming into your organization and impacting upon you. I mean, we've recently had to deal with the influx of the Venezuelan cultures and Venezuelan people coming in here and bringing their own culture into our society, and melding that with our own and creating a sort of new culture in which that allows for it. The problem with it is that we have to be able to understand and value those people coming in. It's not just only understanding them, but we also have to value them as we begin to engage with them. Now, inclusivity is an issue that requires work, because it may cause you to have to adjust some of your principles, because sometimes your principles might be based upon some things that have become old hat, as they may say. Or at the end of the day, I always ask people, regardless of where you think you stand from a moral point of view, what you want to pay attention to doing is understanding why somebody else thinks the way they do and why they position themselves in that particular manner. And that is more important than agreeing with the individual. All right, I'm not saying you have to agree with them. You have to agree to disagree about some things. But what you need to do is you at least need to understand why they're engaging in that type of activity, or why they think along those particular lines. That makes sense, guys? All right. Now the reason for this is that the wider our grouping, or the more varied our grouping is, the more perspectives we bring in to be able to effect change and to deal with issues and problems that come up. Because if we only look at it from people who are all very similar, then we'll get one particular vision or perspective or frame of reference through which we're viewing the issue. But if, on the other hand, we include other people and different perspectives, it gives us a wider perception of things, and therefore we may be able to address issues from a much more broader landscape And that's an important element. That is really part and parcel of why being inclusive is going to be critical. But of course, inclusivity is really a big issue because we always tend to think of ourselves along the lines of, some sort of similarity. So if somebody looks different, then we may treat them differently, and that in itself starts to create some issues and problems moving forward. Um, but it is important for us to be able to listen to individuals and interact with these individuals, because if as a leader you don't, then you're going to create an organization in which you are not going to be tolerant of difference, and that's going to be problematic because if differences are important, because differences is sort of like the world we live in, and if you only have sameness around you, then you're going to end up with a lack of variety that will be able to give you the skills necessary to deal with the type of problems that begin to face your organization or begin to face you as an individual. That's important, therefore, that we are inclusive in nature across the board. All right. So check this one out. The goal is not to overcome the variations and differences among participants, but to build shared purpose. Leading others to lead themselves is key to tapping the intelligence, the spirit, the creativity, the commitment, and most of all, the tremendous unique potential of each individual. Because if we only have the very same people, we get the same approaches to doing things. But if we have a variety of people coming from all walks of life, coming from different backgrounds, who perceive themselves differently, then we're likely to get a lot more creative approaches to looking at the problems and situations that we face around us. Um, just from a simple thing like making sure that your organization is open to more men and women participating in the activity. Now, in a lot of instances, I've found in Trinidad in particular, a lot of social events or social activities or communities don't include a lot of men. Not because men aren't invited to, but men are not, they don't feel as if they can participate or they don't feel welcomed in the organization. In fact, you have a paucity of men participating in a lot of activities. And one that comes to mind too is education. We have a majority of women engaging in further education and studies, and we have a minority of men. Why? Because a lot of times the society looks upon education as a soft skill, and men are supposed to be hard, and they're supposed to be doing things like science and engineering and mechanics and all that kind of stuff. And reality is that the world around us is no longer geared towards that type of thinking. So, I mean, honestly speaking, a lot of people might actually be selling themselves short for that particular type of activity. How do you all feel about that in terms of the lack of men in certain activities, especially when in terms of being inclusive? Are there a lot of guys in your youth groups, Alaha or Rampol?
Yes, sir.
Felicia, yeah? Fair number of guys. That's good. That's good. Excellent. I have always found that I hardly have a lot of guys in my classes. I find I have a lot more women than men. Do you find that happening in further education or the classes you've been attending? There's certain disciplines that have a lot of guys in it. Kinda.
Yeah.
Have you have you
Because
ever
in
paid
my
it?
radiography class, it only has like 2 guys.
Right. And and that you're doing radiography. That's interesting because generally that tends to attract a fair number of guys. But there's one program that attracts a fair number of guys, and that is the IT programs. So if any of you all, Fidna,
So it does a point that you keep asking yourself why throughout the years it continues to
Get
raise
worse?
its head, whereby
Yeah.
men and young men are not fulfilling their role. And then you also see it like in the teaching fraternity. You see a lot of females teaching and less men.
Man.
So the wisdom and the knowledge and the, things that men needs to pass on to men even in the sessions, it's just like females trying to fulfill. And then when the men come, they're not really standing out to make an impact then. So I'm hoping that will change in 2023 somehow or the other. Because they're saying most of the men in prison, it have this negative feedback, a lot of men in prison. But at the end of the day, they who are here sharing knowledge, they have to let their voice be heard, let their presence be felt when they stand in a room positively, that is.
Yeah, Hannah, Josiah, and well, Josiah's the only guy here right now. Hannah, Josiah, the one
Where's that,
man.
sir?
The woman was just talking to you, didn't hear that? When you hear, you have to let your voice be heard.
Okay. I now realize that I am the only male in this class.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
okay.
Well, the only person who's present today, Aaron, kind of fell off just now. There, there's another guy, but I have always noticed since a while back now, since 2000 and actually when I first started teaching actually at John Donaldson, I noticed a paucity of men in further education. Anything beyond O levels, that was it. After that was yeah, I'd find all the guys because I used to work at John Donaldson Technical before. So all the guys would be doing um, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, um, um, MET, which is any kind of mechanical, auto mechanical, that type of stuff. But anything that had to do with science and technology, you'd have a tendency to be more female dominated. I did business management. Well, I used to teach that business management program there. That was female dominated. The science technician program was female dominated. The um, food and catering and on food preparation areas female dominated. Um, Tailoring was male dominated because we used to have that program. Jewelry making was female dominated. The graphic artist was a fair mix. Yeah, a good bit of guys and girls. That was fair. Any IT areas male dominated, but the vast majority of of those programs reside now with MIC, NTSC. You're all familiar with those acronyms, right? Um,
So
they,
NTS.
they, we kind of refer to them as trade schools now, but those qualifications were always going to be more attractive to men because they were seen as man work, basically, to put this in a bad way. But it means that because those jobs were dangerous or were seen as being dangerous, those were the ones that men would get engaged in. In fact, we had one program that I used to teach in as well called process plant operators, and that was heavily male dominated. And the reason for it, I remember I had two female students who came into that program and completed it successfully. And the vast majority of those students would end up working in the process plants in Couva and those areas there. They would get taken up very quickly. But the women who did that training generally didn't end up getting employment within the heavy industries. They would end up more in the food industry. And I've always found it interesting, but because some of those jobs are so physically demanding that a lot of a lot of women who train in the area don't find themselves getting involved in it, or they don't get employed with it. Until, of course, legislation kind of dictated that because of the gender bias in terms of those employment situations, you couldn't be rejected from a job because of your gender, because you were a woman. So those are things that you had to actually deal with. I used to be teaching that class. I used to teach a communication course with them, and a part of that course, I had to teach them industrial language. It was interesting when you were teaching industrial language was, why is there so much swearing in the organization? Now, however, that has changed. You're not allowed to be swearing as much as before, but I'm pretty certain that they still do have a lot of swearing and cussing that's go on in those job sites. All right. So, but we understanding this issue of inclusivity and the problem that that male absence is causing in a lot of organizations, because sometimes what I've always found is that when there's a better balance of men and women in an organization, there's a better mix of things, a mix of ways in which things are going to be dealt with. But you're right, there is a lack of men in participating in a lot of activities, and it creates a stunted or a biased view towards how the operations are set up. So, for example, teaching has always been female dominated. The reason for that is because the teaching service was initially set up for unwed women and women without children to take up maternal types of activities in teaching children, because teaching children was always seen as a female activity, not primarily a male-based activity. The only reason why men were put into the education system was for discipline activities. So this is one of the reasons why you found a lot of principals were men and a lot of deans of disciplines were men, because they would be the ones to administer corporal punishment, and it was female dominated across the board, which is one of the reasons why most of us, when we went to school, we had primarily a lot of female teachers and not a lot of male teachers. I think in my lifespan, in primary school, I didn't have any male teachers. In secondary school, I had mainly male teachers because I went to a boys' school, and we had maybe 5 or 6 or 7 female teachers. But as time went on, we started to get more female teachers coming in and replacing the male teachers as they went out, kind of situation. It's very interesting, that whole issue. But we understand this
But
concept of that. Sorry, go ahead.
so to add to that, I think it even the home has been affected by the same absence of the father or the male figure, and now it has passed in to the society, made it be in workplaces and such like. So children on a whole or youth on a whole are being affected. So it's like a rippling effect in society from the home straight down to society or culture and the various workplaces. So we trust
Yep.
that somehow something might work out best for all of us as humans.
You'd think that this was a particular problem only here in Trinidad, but it's not. Huh? It's an international issue of disengagement by males, especially in developing countries, primarily because males are expected to be earning incomes. And it means that as soon as they finish their high school or lower level, college level schools, O levels in our case, the expectation is that they go out there and they start to work. And the engagement of them in college level and university level work is 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 affected by that need to go out there and earn an income, and kind of like basically make your way through the world and be um, a resource that contributes to the development of your society and your family and that kind of stuff. So, but you're right in terms of the absence of men too in the household. Again, it's because traditionally women are seen as the homemakers, and that tradition has absence of men participating in the homemaking element. Now, if you grew up in a household in which both men and women, your mom and your dad, participated in the parenting activity, then you're likely to copy that. But the vast majority of people experience either a single parent home or an absentee father home, where the father was only there not to contribute to the household in discipline and that type of stuff, but was only there because of the paycheck issue. Um, they were primarily just workers. Um, they would go out and work, bring the money home, and then don't participate in the development of the children and participate in all that type of stuff. So that's something that you also kind of have that disengagement issue that takes place. A lot of us might have grown up with, our dads being there, but not there at the same time, kind of thing like that. Um, so that's something that inherently, as we move forward in life, there are some expectations in relation to that moving forward too. All right. Okay, so we looked at group inclusiveness. In terms of leadership, let's see. Now, that is inclusive within the organization, but we also have to look at inclusiveness in terms of people who are peripheral to the organization. Here we're talking about stakeholders and shareholders. So this diagram here actually kind of represents everything that we need to discuss in terms of this. The people who are external to us are stakeholders or shareholders. Shareholders are those individuals who are directly impacted by the decisions that an organization make. So like, for example, when the college makes a decision, our shareholders are you. You all are part and parcel of the situation. In fact, how many of you all have ever participated in focus group meetings with us, or have participated in surveys where we asked you to, respond to certain questionnaires to be able to get feedback in terms of your perception and ideas about something that's happening, or the college is trying to make some changes. How many of you all have done those things? Up to just, I think 2 weeks ago, we were sending out some stuff for us to support. All right, Ms. DeLeon, you did one. Okay. Now, how many of you all also do the at the end of the semester when you have the faculty evaluation? How many of you all do that? You do your lecture evaluations. All right, DeLeon again.
Yes.
But it's something that you ought to. What? Go ahead. You do it as well,
So I was
Chanel?
just saying.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying that I just do the evaluation at the end of the semester.
Okay. We should get more because it's usually helpful. But I know a lot of people feel that lecturers will know who said what. We don't. You engage with that instrument. That instrument is online. It pulls all the data and puts it into a database. We don't have access to the database, but reports are pulled from it, and all we get is an amalgamation of statistical data in terms of how you responded to the questions. And if there were comments that were made, people typed in specific comments, we get a list of comments, generalities in terms of most often this was said, and so on. And they usually help us make decisions about what's working, what's not working, what I need to work on, what I'm okay with, that type of stuff. So it gives us some sort of feedback for that. So as opposed to a shareholder, we have stakeholders. Stakeholders are those people who are affected by decisions, but they're not directly involved in decisions. So for example, though you all are shareholders, because you all share an interest with us, stakeholders would be things like the industry. The industry that is, like, for example, Kalisha, you are a radiographer. So that set of people, or that part of society of association of radiologists and that allied medical services that exist there is a stakeholder, because if we make changes to your program, it's likely to affect your standing with those stakeholders. So therefore, classifying them as being supportive, antagonistic, problematic, and low priority is going to be something that we have to spend time dealing with, especially if we want to be inclusive of all of the individuals that take part or are affected by decisions in making. We have to make sure we have a way to reach out to these individuals. Supportive is easy because once they're highly supportive, it means that whatever we're doing, they support it and they see it as being very important. The problematic people are difficult because whatever it is we're doing, it is of low importance to them, but they have a high level of opposition towards whatever we're doing. They prefer what it used to be in the past. At the end of the day, that's what they think. Whatever was going on in the past, we're okay with that. No new change, please. Low priority is dangerous as well because that is where they are highly supportive of something, but again, low importance. They don't really care, but they have they're okay with you doing it. Low priority. Okay, antagonistic is a dangerous set. Of course, if you find your stakeholders and shareholders falling into high levels of opposition, and because it's highly important to them, they're going to be highly antagonistic, then you're going to have to spend a lot more time working with those stakeholders and shareholders who fall into that category to be able to explain to them why we're doing it. So therefore, in order to include them in some of the decision making is very important. So one of the things that we do, for example, whenever we're making program changes, is we invite people from the industry to represent their interests on the stakeholder committees to be able to guide us in making decisions that would be reflective of what their interests are, both from a student perspective as well as from industry's perspective as well. So those are the things we try to do when we're dealing with um, um, people who we're trying to involve from outside the organization. Now, we spoke about empowerment. So empowerment means that as a leader, you would want to try to empower everybody in your organization to feel as if they are important and they can do things in the organization, and that their actions are going to be valued. So there are two elements of empowerment: the sense of self that will claim ownership and claim a place in the thing. So that means you do something as a leader that gives other people a sense of this is important to me as well as the organization, and therefore I want to be involved. So it's a sense of self that claims ownership and then says this is my contribution to the process of making the changes. And the second element is to set up an environment in the organization that will promote the involvement of people. So you can't just want to create a sense of empowerment for individuals, but you also have to set up an environment in the organization that encourages that level of participation and doesn't hamper that level of involvement from the people that you're working with. Now, some leaders have challenges with this because empowerment means giving up power. So you're giving power to other people in the organization to make decisions and to impact upon changes that are taking place in the organization. And some people are highly threatened by this type of that situation. Okay, so before I go on in empowerment, I wanted to offer you a little break. Is that going to be okay? And then we get back in and complete this. Yes. Yeah? Okay. So get up and take a walk. I'll stop the recording for now and